We all know 6 wives of King Henry VIII are killed, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But did you know King Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was divorced? Well, let me explain. But in 1509, King Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon.
Do you, Catherine, take Henry to be your husband?
I do.
But Catherine of Aragon suffered 5 miscarriages. 1516, Catherine gave birth to Mary
Again, you give me a daughter.
and King Henry VIII was mad
daughter
because
is
he wanted a
nothing.
male heir. But King Henry VIII was in love with one of Catherine ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn. But King Henry VIII wanted divorce. But King Henry VIII tried to ask the Pope to get a divorce from Catherine, but the Pope say no.
The
but
Pope
King
defies
Henry
me?
VIII
Then I
break
defy
from
Rome.
the Catholic Church.
England shall have her own church, free from papal tyranny.
But in
My lady, these are
1533,
from the
King
king.
Henry VIII divorced
From
Catherine
Henry?
of Aragon.
He has cast me aside.
But King
With
Henry
this
VIII
ring, I thee
married
wed.
Anne Boleyn.
With this ring, I thee wed.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
This is the story of Catherine of Aragon. We all know King Henry VIII killed his wives, and King Henry VIII divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. But did you know King Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn, was executed and beheaded? Well, let me explain. But in 1501, Anne Boleyn was born. But in 1522, Anne Boleyn went straight to the UK. But Anne Boleyn
And my
first
love
met
for you
King Henry
consumes
VIII,
me.
and
Your
King Henry
Majesty,
VIII
you honor
was in
me.
love
You
with
will
Anne
be
Boleyn.
mine.
But there is a problem. King Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. But King Henry VIII tried to ask the Pope to get a divorce from Catherine, but the Pope say no.
The
but
Pope
King
defies
Henry
me?
VIII
Then I
break the
defy
Catholic
Rome.
Church.
England shall have her own church, free from papal tyranny.
But in
My lady, these are
1533,
from
King
the
Henry
king.
VIII divorced
From
Catherine
Henry?
of Aragon.
He has cast me aside.
But King
With
Henry
this
VIII
ring, I thee
married
wed.
Anne Boleyn.
With this ring, I thee wed.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
But Anne Boleyn gave birth to Elizabeth
You have given me a
Tudor,
daughter!
and King
I
Henry
need a
VIII
son! A
was
son
mad
to
because
secure
he
the
wanted
throne!
a male heir.
A daughter!
But in 1534,
Yes,
Anne
my
Boleyn
sweet, they
plays
are
with
beautiful.
2-year-old Elizabeth Tudor.
Thank you, darling.
Anne Boleyn was actually just a queen of England. But King Henry VIII was in love with Jane Seymour. But Anne Boleyn was guilty of adultery, incest, of treason, and she was sent to the dungeons. But
in
Anne
England
Boleyn
there
goes
is the
to the
Tower of
of
London. This ancient
and Anne
fortress
Boleyn
has
was
stood guard
imprisoned.
over the city for centuries.
But in 1536, Anne Boleyn was going to be executed. But Anne Boleyn goes to the dungeons, and Anne Boleyn say her last words to her people. And Anne Boleyn put down her knees, and the swordsman was behind Anne Boleyn. But the swordsman swings the sword, and Anne Boleyn is
Boleyn is
executed
dead.
and beheaded.
Anne Boleyn is dead.
But King Henry VIII,
Anne
no,
Boleyn is
Anne
dead.
Boleyn is dead. King Henry VIII, no, it was done. This is the story of Anne Boleyn.
We all know King Henry VIII executed his wives. But did you know Jane Seymour is the only one that gave King Henry VIII?
But Jane Seymour was just a noble woman, but in 1535 Jane
But
Jane,
Jane
my love,
Seymour
you have
met
bewitched
King
me.
Henry VIII, and King
Your
Henry
Majesty,
VIII
what?
was in love with Jane
Then you are
Seymour.
mine.
But in 1536, Anne Boleyn was
Anne Boleyn
executed
is
and
dead.
beheaded in the
Anne
Tower
Boleyn
of
is
London.
dead.
Do you
But
take
King
Jane
Henry
to be your
VIII
wife?
married Jane Seymour.
I do. And do you take Henry to be your husband?
I do.
But in 1537, Jane Seymour was pregnant, and King Henry VIII hoped it was a boy.
But in
sweet Edward, you
1537
are
Jane
so
Seymour
perfect.
gave birth to a son named
You will be a
Edward, and
great
King Henry
king one
VIII
day.
was happy.
But
Henry, my
Jane
love,
Seymour
I'm
died in
fading.
childbirth, leaving Henry and
Don't leave me.
Edward.
Farewell.
They have planned the funeral of Jane Seymour, and King Henry VIII is wearing black. This is the story of Jane Seymour.
We all know King Henry VIII executed his wives. But did you know Anne of Cleve was divorced by King Henry VIII because she is ugly? Well, let me explain.
Anne of Cleve was born in Germany, but Anne of Cleve learned education.
But King Henry VIII from the Tudor family is looking for a new wife.
But King Henry VIII
She looks
saw the
beautiful in that
portrait of Anne of
portrait.
Cleve, but King Henry
like to
VIII
pick her to be
picked
my
Anne of
wife.
Cleve because she looks beautiful in that
She
portrait.
looks beautiful in that portrait.
But when they met
Anne
King
of Cleves
Henry
is so
VIII is
ugly. She looks
discussed
nothing
because
like
Anne
her
of Cleve
portrait.
is ugly.
Off with Thomas Cromwell's head!
Thomas Cromwell was executed and beheaded in the Tower of London. But in 1540 King Henry VIII
Do you
married
take this
Anne
woman?
of Cleve.
I do.
And you, Anne of Cleves?
I do.
Anne of Cleve is just the Queen of England and she knows what happened to Henry's other wives. Anne of
Your
Cleve was
Highnesses,
nice to King Henry
Anne of
VIII,
Cleves,
3
We are
children.
pleased to see you. Good day, Lady Anne.
But Anne of Cleve
You
was
are
nice to
growing
King
into such a
Henry
fine
VIII's
young
daughter,
woman,
Princess Elizabeth Tudor.
Thank you, my lady. Your kindness means a great deal.
But King Henry
sweet
VIII
Catherine,
was
you
in
are
love
the
with
jewel of
Catherine
my
Howard.
heart.
And you, my lord, are my king and my love.
In 1540,
Cleves, I
King
present
Henry
you with this
VIII
decree of
divorced Anne
divorce.
of Cleve.
I accepted, your majesty.
Anne of Cleve
I
was
miss my
sad because she
people.
missed her people.
Oh, I miss them.
This is the story of Anne of Cleve.
We all know King Henry VIII executed his wives. Did you know Catherine Howard was executed and beheaded at the age of 18, younger than all of Henry's wives? Well, let me explain.
But Catherine Howard was born in 1523. But Catherine Howard was 13. She was sexual abused by Henry Minox and Francis Durham.
But when Catherine was 16, she was new to the Tudor castle.
But Catherine
sweet
Howard
Catherine,
met
you
King
are the
Henry
jewel of
VIII,
my
and King
heart.
Henry VIII
And you,
was in
my
love
lord,
with
are my
Catherine
king
Howard.
and my love.
But in 1540,
Cleves, I
King
present
Henry
you with this
VIII
decree of
divorced
divorce.
Anne of Cleve.
I accepted, your majesty.
But
Catherine
King
Howard,
Henry
wilt thou
VIII
have me to
married
thy wedded
Catherine
husband?
Howard.
I will.
With this ring I thee wed.
But Catherine Howard was just the Queen of England. But Catherine Howard
You
was
must not
nice
look
to
so
Princess
sad, my
Elizabeth
lady.
Tudor.
You are not alone.
But Catherine
Thomas, the
Howard met
gardens are
Thomas
enchanting
Culpeper
today.
and they fell in love with each other.
as you.
Your words are sweet.
But King Henry VIII found out and he was mad.
Catherine and Culpeper. She has betrayed me!
Catherine Howard runs
Majesty,
for her
mercy!
life, but the
Seize
guards
her!
caught her.
No! Unhand me!
Take her to the tower.
But in 1541, Catherine Howard was imprisoned in the Tower of London. In 1542, the guards goes
Majesty,
to Catherine
it is
Howard
time.
and the guards said
I
it's
understand.
time.
Lead on.
But in 1542, Catherine Howard was executed and beheaded.
This is the story of Catherine Howard. We all know King Henry VIII executed his wives.
But did you know King Henry VIII's sixth wife Catherine Parr survived? Well, let me explain.
Catherine Parr was just a noble woman and King Henry VIII was in love with Catherine Parr, but Catherine didn't want to marry Henry.
But King Henry VIII didn't have no choice but to force Catherine Parr to marry him.
But in 1543,
I take
King
thee,
Henry
Catherine
VIII
Parr, to
married
be my
Catherine
wife.
Parr.
And I take thee, Henry, to be my husband.
But
I'm
Catherine
scared.
Parr was scared because
I
she
know
knows what
what
happened
happened
to
to his
Henry's
6
other
wives.
wives.
Beheaded, divorced, died. It could be me next.
But Catherine Parr was just the Queen of England. But Catherine Parr
both
was
have
nice
such
to
bright
Princess
futures
Elizabeth
ahead.
Tudor
We
and
must
Princess
ensure
Mary
you are well
Tudor.
prepared.
But
Catherine,
Catherine
my leg
Parr
pains
takes
me
care
so.
of King
Rest
Henry
easy, my
VIII.
lord. I shall tend to it.
Your touch brings relief.
In 1547,
Oh my God, I
King
survived the
Henry
tyrant
VIII
king.
died and Catherine Parr
Thank
survived.
God.
This is the story of Catherine Parr. We all know King Henry VIII is the tyrant king. But did you know King Henry VIII executed his wives? Well, let me explain. But in
You, Henry, take
1509,
Catherine to be
King
your
Henry
wife.
VIII married
You,
Catherine of
take
Aragon.
Henry to be your husband.
I do.
But Catherine of Aragon had 5 miscarriage. But in 1516,
daughter.
Catherine
Again, you
gave
give me
birth
a
to
daughter.
Mary
She's
Tudor,
our
and
child,
King Henry
Henry.
VIII
daughter
is
is
mad
nothing.
because he wanted a male heir.
A daughter.
But King Henry VIII was in love with one of Catherine Lady-in-Waiting, Anne Boleyn. But
And
King
my
Henry
love for
VIII
you
fell in love
consumes
with
me.
Anne Boleyn, writing letters to
Do
each
you
other.
honor me?
You will be mine.
But
My
in
lady, these are from the
1533, King Henry VIII
From Henry?
divorced Catherine of Aragon.
Cast me aside.
But
With this
King
ring
Henry
I thee
VIII
wed.
married Anne
With
Boleyn.
this ring, I thee wed.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
But Anne
daughter!
Boleyn gave birth
You
to
have given
Elizabeth,
me a
and King
daughter!
Henry
I
VIII
need a
was mad
son,
because
a
he
son
wanted
to
a male
secure the
heir.
throne. Jane,
But
my
King
love, you
Henry
have
VIII
bewitched
was
me.
in love with Jane
Your
Seymour.
Majesty, words.
Then you are mine.
But in 1536, Anne Boleyn was
Anne Boleyn is
executed and
dead.
beheaded.
Anne Boleyn was dead.
But King
Do you
Henry
take Jane
VIII
to be your
married
wife?
Jane Seymour.
I do. And do you take Henry to be your husband?
I do.
But in
My sweet Edward, you are
1537,
so
Jane
perfect.
Seymour gave birth to a son
You will
named
be a
Edward,
great
and
king
King
one
Henry
day.
was happy.
But
Henry,
Jane
my
Seymour
love, I
died
am
in
fated.
childbirth, leaving
Jane,
Henry
do
and
not
Edward.
leave me. Farewell.
But in 1540, King Henry
Do you
VIII
take this
married
woman?
Anne of Cleve.
I do.
And you, Anne of Cleves?
I do.
But
Anne of
King
Cleves,
Henry
I
VIII
present you with
divorced
this decree
Anne
of
of Cleve
divorce.
again because she was ugly.
I accepted, Your Majesty.
But
Catherine
King
Howard,
Henry
wilt thou
VIII
have me to
married
thy wedded
Catherine
husband?
Howard.
I will.
With this ring I thee wed.
But in
Thomas, the gardens are
1541,
enchanting
Catherine
today.
Howard was
They are,
cheating
but not
on
as
King
enchanting
Henry
as
with
you.
Thomas Culpeper
words
and
are
Henry
sweet.
find out. But in 1542, Catherine Howard was executed and beheaded at the age of 18. But in
I take thee,
1543, King
Catherine
Henry
Parr,
VIII
to be my
married
wife.
Catherine Parr.
And I take thee, Henry, to be my husband.
But Catherine Parr was
I
scared
know
because
what
she
happened to
knows
his
what
6
happened to
wives.
King Henry
Beheaded,
VIII
divorced,
other
died.
wives.
It could be me next.
But in
Oh my God, I
1547,
survived
King
the
Henry
tyrant
VIII
king.
died and Catherine
Thank
Parr
God.
survived. This is the story of the 6 wives of King Henry VIII.